Radio Voice Italia, Philadelphia.
Class is now in session. Christopher Columbus University is on air from Philadelphia and broadcasting worldwide from within the shadow of Marconi Plaza. Radio Voice Italia is proud to present a recurring segment with civil rights author, professional researcher, and renowned Christopher Columbus expert, Robert Felix Petrone, Esquire.
Buongiorno tutti, and welcome to Radio Voice Italia's Christopher Columbus University, where we teach you the truth about the greatest hero of the 15th and 16th centuries, Christopher Columbus, and update you on the international efforts to preserve Christopher Columbus's legacy. I'm your host, il professore, Robert Petrone. Today on our Christopher Columbus University segment, we have a special guest. I'd like to introduce you all to the chairman of the Strategic Planning Committee of the Italian-American Alliance in Massachusetts, which has over 7,000 Massachusetts members, Mr. Thomas Damigella. Mr. Damigella, welcome to Christopher Columbus University.
Well, it's a pleasure to be here, Robert. Thank you for the invitation. I look forward to it.
Well, I mean, in my eyes, you're a hero. You're up there with John and Sam Adams, John Hancock, Paul Revere, and all the other great Bostonians. I know that Hancock and John Adams were born in Braintree, but we think of them as Bostonians, and you are among them. So please tell the listeners, what exactly is the IAA, the Italian-American Alliance?
The Italian-American Alliance was formed about 6 years ago from some gentlemen that really had a vision to organize the Italian Americans in the Massachusetts area to really promote and preserve our heritage as Italian Americans, which is very important to us because we've talked about 3 generations since the Great Immigration to the turn of the century. And we have a prominent Italian American population in Massachusetts and still have prominent areas that are well known for our Italian background. And at the same time, strongly knew that there was an issue of trying to smear and denigrate Christopher Columbus. So that's one of our objectives, is to really preserve and protect the reputation of Christopher Columbus, which has been unfairly crucified by political activist groups over the last several decades. And it's kind of snuck up on everybody in the Italian-American community. And all of a sudden we woke up and realized there's a movement out there to discredit him with false information. So so we got several things we're doing, the heritage aspect and the cultural, and also the aspect of what Columbus means to the Italian-American community, and to get out there to tell the truth. And that's one of my major roles in this association.
Yeah, and we really were sandbagged as a community by this campaign, and the analogy to the crucifixion is very apt in this situation. So some fun facts about Massachusetts. It's one of our 4 states in the United States that calls itself a commonwealth rather than a state, the others being Kentucky, Virginia, and my own Pennsylvania, though the distinction is really without a difference. Massachusetts also played a huge role in the formation of our country and our fight for independence. I got to tell you something. I love Boston. I took my children there for a summer vacation for a week. I showed them all of the sites. I think of Boston and Philadelphia as the 2 main cities in our fight for independence in the Revolutionary War. I'm sure that is inspiring to you in a fight such as the ones we're engaging in over our Italian-American heritage these days.
Yeah, there's a real similar parallel to that. It's true. It was 400 years ago. I consider Boston the cradle of liberty.
Yeah.
Probably like you feel about Philadelphia, but we have the Freedom Trail here, and it goes right through the heart of the Italian-American North End, and which has its own story as being the birthplace of immigrants coming into the Massachusetts and the United States. So we have some real history, tremendous amount of history. You come to Boston, you get the American history from the beginning to going through the 400 years since our establishment. And I feel very strong about it. There's a lot of similarities as to what we're doing with the birth of our Italian-American heritage and also the country right here in Boston.
Yeah. Now, John Hancock, he's famous for his signature on the Declaration of Independence. You penned a formal, you called it a unified voice letter to the State House of the Massachusetts Legislature about the Columbus Day controversy in Massachusetts, signed by representatives from many Italian-American organizations And correct me if I'm wrong, you got positive responses to sign from all organizations contacted. Is that right?
We just got about, excuse me, we got about almost 98% of everybody that wanted to be involved. And that's what we wanted to do, get one voice, one unified voice, because that's important. To bring the Italian communities together is one of the challenges. And I think too often we've been splintered groups. And that's one of the reasons why we kind of got caught off guard, because we're not paying attention and we're doing our own thing. And it was really wonderful that we did confirm that we had this kind of over 25, 20, 26, 27 organizations are all part of the letter that we sent to the State House in response to their pending legislation to eliminate Christopher Columbus Day in lieu of Indigenous Peoples Day. And we thought it was important to become visible, because there are other people lobbying at the State House, which happens to come from the indigenous people. And, you know, they shouldn't have the only voice about this. And I know our legislators really, they respond to the whatever wheel gets greased, as you might say. All right?
Yeah.
And so this is really just the beginning. The letter really brings our attention to the State House and the leaders and the committee that's handling this. And I believe that it's going to have a tremendous impact. And we're just going to continue to follow it up. And we have this lobbying effort that letting them be aware of that there's 800,000 Italian Americans in Massachusetts. We're one of the largest populations in the entire country. And they vote for every one of those people on the Hill. And I don't think they want to get 800,000 people unhappy.
That's right. Now, what does the letter say in sum and substance?
Okay. Simply, we started right away with the history and the background, how Columbus was first recognized on his 400th anniversary of 1492, which happened in 1892. And the president back then was President Cleveland. And there was a big episode, an event that took place. It was horrific, where 11 Sicilians were hung in Louisiana and New Orleans for a crime they never committed. It was such a scandal that it created a backlash, even all the way out to Italy. And Cleveland realized that it was an injustice and wanted to amend whatever Italian communities at that time and amend the harm that was done to the Italian community and to Italy. And he first recognized Christopher Columbus Day as a unifying effort back then in 1892. So I kind of told that story in our letter, letting them know this has always been connected as an effort to give recognition to the Italian Americans that just started to come into the United States. And for since that period of time, for over 120 years, we have been proudly associated with Columbus and the journey that he made, which is a very historical event that changed the world. As you know, Robert, you're an expert on this. So we kind of wrote about this and how FDR made it an official holiday, and that there were all types of efforts to bring to the American people, not just the Italian American people, the importance of Christopher Columbus. And don't forget, even the Columbia that went to the moon, it was named the Columbia. They understood that they're going to new places, new journeys, new areas. And D.C. Columbus, there's more places named Columbus in this country than one can imagine. And so we addressed those things. And then we gave them certain solutions. Because when you do say you don't like the legislation, they want you to know, well, what's your solution? And we said, first of all, the solution is we agree that our Native American brothers and sisters should be recognized. They have an important heritage as much as we do, and that we should have take the time to recognize. But this is not the way to do it. You don't take one person's heritage and smear it and get rid of it in order to recognize another group. It's counterproductive, and it's contradictory and hypocritical.
Yes, I agree. Yes.
So in the letter, we just say that there was also already holidays designated by the federal government, that the day after Thanksgiving would be Native American Heritage Day. And also the entire month of November in 1990, George Bush first actually called it Native American Heritage Month. But nobody uses it, and it hasn't been promoted from the indigenous people, because politically their only answer is to get even for the injustices they have. For some reason, they think it's either get rid of Christopher Columbus, who they now have smeared unfairly, calling him a genocidal maniac of slavery and everything else, which is not true. And they, for some reason, have turned this into a political football. And,
well, yeah.
And that kind of sums it all up. But we gave them suggestions. And honestly, Robert, you know that the public out there is badly educated about the real history of Columbus. and it's been a political smear job. And in the education system, thanks to Howard Zinn, as you know all about him. By the way, Howard Zinn was a professor at Boston University when I was a student.
No kidding. Oh, my goodness.
So I saw that man in action. I saw him lead the anti-Vietnam protest, which was very popular back then. He was on the right side of history, but the man is an absolute communist. The history on him is incredible, but he's a very charismatic man. BU loves him. To this day, they still honor him. But he was in a protest that was very popular, but he was a Marxist that was using a very unpopular war to disclaim and discredit the United States as an imperialistic force. And he's never lost that attitude. He hates Western civilization. He wrote a whole book on the people's history of the United States, and it basically slanders the United States, and it got into the educational system. So my grandchildren and my children now have been taught things that are untrue because they've used his book in the school system. And we never knew it as parents. We're totally oblivious to this. And all of a sudden we wake up and we say, why do my grandchildren, when I ask the question, what do you know about just Christopher Columbus? You know what the first thing they said? Oh, he's a bad man. And that was enough for me to say, okay, we've got a battle on our hand and we've got a lot of work to rewrite history because the revisionists have screwed it up badly.
I interviewed Dr. Mary Graybar in episode 23 of Christopher Columbus University, and she talked about Zinn, and she wrote a book called Debunking Howard Zinn, and we talked about that book among her other writings. So what is there a model letter that listeners can send regarding this bill, Bill 3191 that you wrote about?
Yes, we have it on Facebook. We have it on our webpage, and I did put it aside just so I could tell you what that webpage was, but it's the Italian American Alliance .com on Facebook, and we have it also on a webpage that you can get and find that exact information, which is of the same thing, the Italian American Alliance. You'll find it in Boston with our logo, 1492. It's a round logo, and you can find that information. We've already posted it. And the model letter is what we've already circulated amongst our organizations, that the idea was to have their own members to send a letter, not just to the State House, but to their particular senator and state representative, because that's who's going to vote for them, where they live. Yeah. And that's why we did it that way, too.
Yeah. Also, I do want to make the point that, and I'm sure you'll agree with me, we were talking about how Zinn was a Marxist. It is really the Marxists and not the tribal peoples of the Americas who are behind this campaign of damnatio memoriae. Some of the tribal peoples, they are used by the Marxists as foot soldiers in this war. But really, when you talk to people, I had Mark Onewolf on in episode 28, and they are not really in favor as a people of getting rid of Christopher Columbus. This is a campaign by the Marxists. Now, I remember receiving correspondence from Matt Guarnieri of the Italian American Defense League back in September of 2021, asking me to write a letter to the Massachusetts legislature about Bill 3191. And I did so that day. And then I also contacted Dr. Carol Delaney, whom, in my opinion, is the premier Christopher Columbus expert in the world. And I gave her a list of people that we needed to write to, and she wrote to many of them. So this fight has been going on for a while, but you have characterized Christopher Columbus as the first victim of the cancel culture in America. Why do you think that is, that he was the first?
It really is kind of sums up what the summer of love 2020, after the Floyd incident and murder, etc. All the protests, Black Lives Matter, cancel culture, the Confederate soldiers, etc. statues. The easiest statue that they could find throughout the country was not Confederate soldiers, but Christopher Columbus. And because of the smear job that they've had already going out there, they just picked up that messaging by calling him a genocidal maniac, that he was a slaver, all the things that was being talked about in the 2020, that they had to revisit these things. The 1619 project that came out of the New York Times, that this country was built on slavery. So that whole political agenda, Columbus became the easiest symbol because he's in every city of the United States. They could find a statue of Columbus There's probably more statues of Columbus than most statues in the United States, and he became an easy target. It's called simply scapegoating. They don't have to know the truth. They think they know the truth, and basically most of the young people thought they're doing something noble and virtuous, but they were what I call as useful idiots in the whole event.
Yeah, that is a really good point. You know, that there's a Columbus statue in every city, and so that was an easy way to just to make a visible media blurb that people could watch on the news in every city. It was a rallying point in every city. And you're right. You know, the Marxists really they preyed on people's ignorance about Columbus. All we ever learned about Columbus in school was that in 1492 he sailed the ocean blue, and we never were taught all of the rest of the stuff that I'm bringing to the masses with Christopher Columbus University about his being the first abolitionist, his work as the first civil rights activist, his 3 underground railroads, all the first civil rights legislation of the Americas that he drafted and got the king to sign. You know, I bring this out to the masses, but people didn't know that. And on top of not knowing it, Columbus had been slandered for decades thanks to Zinn. And that made him, as you say, low-hanging fruit. He was an icon of Western culture, but he was low-hanging fruit, and that was the first of the campaign to tear down American icons. Now it's Thomas Jefferson, it's George Washington, it's going to be everybody else soon. Now, you also pointed out that efforts to educate Columbus detractors have been met with disdain, ridicule, anger, and aggression, and this really overlaps with what you were just talking about. Why do you think they use disdain, ridicule, anger, and aggression to as a response to attempts to educate Columbus detractors?
They must either think that they're so right and self-righteous about their position that they have, that they know more than you do, Robert, or myself, about the history of the man. And it's hard for people to admit that they were duped. So whatever knowledge they might have gotten about Columbus that was bad, they feel they got it from a reliable source. And if I went to Boston University, do you think I'm going to win an argument with my own alma mater about Howard Zinn? They still worship the man over there. So if I try to even bring up, which I have with the president of Boston University, and told him I took position, because they at BU got rid of Christopher Columbus Day on the calendar, and I wrote and said we should have a due process to explain this. I wish I had some input to your committees that worked on this. But they based it on his book. So are they going to admit they're listening to a man that really was not telling the truth? So they're going to get very defensive, and they do get aggressive. They say, I know more than you, and they don't. And that's, I think, is where that comes from, because they have to take their political position, which now also supports their, guess what? You've got diversity, equity, and inclusion. Mm-hmm. And every school, every local community around Massachusetts that has brought this issue up recently, guess where it comes from? In 2020, now I've seen a pattern in every town I've dealt with. They formed a diversity and equity inclusion committee in 2020, and one of the first things they suggest to the town is get rid of Christopher Columbus Day.
Yeah, that's always the first step.
It's such an obvious pattern. This do-right, virtuous thing that we're going to show that we're not racist and we believe in social justice. They pick on Columbus because they think it's justified.
Yeah, it's opposite speak. He's the first civil rights activist, and they think tearing his statues down is an act of civil rights.
So it's a lot of educational process to go through this, and we've had that's why it's a fight. But when we do get people's attention, we've had 4 towns that were ready to take the eliminate Christopher Columbus Day, and we got the residents to get a voice, and we taught them and worked with them, and they stopped it because now they had information, which is powerful. You have to educate the people that want to defend them. You just say, I don't want it to be a tradition. You got to give them the reasons, and you have to take the time. And so now we're doing it at the state level. We've done it at the local level. But imagine, how can we stop it at the local level if my state basically gets rid of Christopher Columbus Day? So that's what I'm concentrating on.
Right. Now, so the local level, you did that in Billerica, Massachusetts. You did that in
Billerica.
I'm sorry?
Billerica,
I'm sorry. And also in Westborough, Massachusetts. I did report on those events in episode 28 with Mark Onewolf. And Westborough, I mean, that episode 15, 21, 23, 28, I was following that very closely. Now, in Boston, where I know you have been active, the fight has been another Boston massacre. First, only days away from leaving her position as mayor, and in fact, the first African-American mayor of Boston, Kim Janey proclaimed without warning to anyone but the media and a contingent of insiders that Boston was going to celebrate Indigenous Peoples Day instead of Christopher Columbus Day. And then she lost her primary bid for mayor to now Mayor Michelle Wu, who has also spoken out about Columbus Day. And during her campaign, she, if I'm not mistaken, received endorsements from revisionist history promoters like Congresswoman Ayanna Pressley, Senator Elizabeth Warren, who interestingly revised her own ethnic history for her own personal gain. And on October 11th, Columbus Day, the Italian-American Alliance held a vigil and a wreath-laying ceremony at the pedestal where the statue of Christopher Columbus had been erected and later destroyed by vandals. And prior to the ceremony, I know that the pedestal was again vandalized. Tell us a little bit about all of those events, the politics of it, and the statue and the wreath-laying ceremony.
Yeah, the politics is really dirty politics. When Janey did that, she had already lost the primary. So she's out the window, she's out the door. And so just days before she was going to be replaced by the new mayor, because, Wu was running after that, but she lost the primary to Wu. And so she knew she wasn't even going to be mayor anymore. And she came up with this executive order. And the day before she wrote it, that's when we heard a rumor. And the next day she announced it. Now, of course, this was all planned. And she had people from tribes that were standing up on the stage, all being part of the signing, because she was collaborating with them. We knew nothing about it. She said and she lied that she spoke to Italian Americans in the North End community. We could, to this day, find nobody she had a conversation with, or nobody's come forth to say, oh, yes, we discussed it. It's baloney. And so she was only acting mayor at the time. She never got elected because when Mayor Walsh went to Washington, D.C., she took his place because she was not elected, by the way, Rob. She just was the head city councilor, and because of her position, she took it over. So it was an historical moment, but it's because of circumstances. And she really cut us off down at the knees. And I think that executive order to this day, I think, was unfair and illegal. And it was a dirty thing that she did. And of course, the people that are progressives and think that they're right about Columbus, they came and supported her right away because they think that's who's going to vote for them. Right. That's what Massachusetts is all about. And so they go along with the political messaging. And so what we did on Columbus Day, where a few days later, she did it October 6th, and Columbus Day was the 11th. So we already planned a vigil at the pedestal where Columbus's statue was over a year ago, almost 2 years ago. He was decapitated, and the statue was removed. But the pedestal's still there, and we had a ceremony, and about, I'd say, 250 people showed up at that time. We made speeches, we made our point, and I think one news person happened to be there. Now, if we were the indigenous people, supposedly, in our outfits, dancing on top of the pedestal, which they did 2 years ago, there were a lot more news people thinking that's a wonderful story to promote. There's a lot of inconsistencies in how this is handled. Yeah. And so that's how we try to make a message. And it's very hard to get out in front of everybody to get our message across, but we're doing everything we can to be visible.
Yes, you are. Yeah, there are a lot of inconsistencies, and there's a lot also of dirty and illegal executive orders going around in American cities these days regarding Christopher Columbus, and Philadelphia joins you in that. Now, speaking of councilwomen, also City Councilwoman Lydia Edwards, who, by the way, recently replaced former Councilman Salvatore Lamattina in Boston, betrayed the Italian-American constituency by posting to her Facebook page this hateful, ignorant, and ahistorical message, quote, "We need to divorce Columbus from the celebration of Italian heritage, period." And she wrote the word period out, end quote. So now who precisely Edwards means by we, I don't know, because she's not Italian, so where she gets off telling Italian Americans how we are to celebrate our heritage is a mystery. But then she went on to become elected to state senate, replacing former state senator Joseph Boncuore. And you wrote a letter to, on behalf of the Italian American Alliance to Edwards, back when she was a councilwoman, condemning those words and actions. Boston's Italian American newspaper, the Post-Gazette, published your letter. What did you say to her?
That's the phrase that really got under my skin. In fact, she did say we. She didn't say we. She said it's time the Italian American community divorce itself from Christopher Columbus. That's what she's telling me and you and others, that we should divorce ourselves from our heritage of Columbus, knowing how ignorant she is and how insensitive a remark that was. So when I wrote my letter, I called her out on that, said that she was out of line taking that position, and she does not have the right to tell us whether we should separate ourselves from, especially when she's assuming that we shouldn't be linked to somebody that is not worthy of it. And so I wrote my explanation that he has a definite legitimate history, not only for the Italian Americans, but in the United States, and she's on the wrong side of this argument. And I went and wrote that letter and published it in the Post-Gazette. And I sent it to her on Facebook, because they were right away the next day, people were chiming in. She's got a lot of people follow on Facebook, and most of them, even some Italians, said, "Oh, I'm glad you clarified yourself. I understand maybe we should do Italian Heritage Month instead, or Columbus isn't worthy of Italian." They went along, chimed in, so she thought she was a hero. And I put my Facebook message up there, basically disclaiming it. In a matter of 2 days, my message was gone.
Unbelievable.
They just took it down,
Yeah.
and that was it. So I got it in the Post-Gazette, and it circulated around, and I did it as I made my point, and I shared it with people within our community. But see, this is what they do, and she's the North End representative, by the way.
Right.
She is
Yeah, I know.
the Italian community city councilor of East Boston, the North End, and Charlestown, which are all old ethnic neighborhoods, two of them being predominantly Italian, but the demographics have changed over the last 20 years, and we don't have that same nucleus of Italians that we did have at one time. She never would have got away with this years ago. And here's the funny part. In 2019, 2018, and 17, these same people, these politicians, were marching in the Christopher Columbus parade.
Yeah.
So now what are they going to do?
Yeah.
They didn't mind marching there. They were getting votes back then. So they had to show up.
That's right. Yeah, I always say if it weren't for double standards, the Columbus detractors would have none at all. I particularly liked the part in your letter where you wrote, quote, "It is clear to me that you have not even taken the time to educate yourself as to why we defend Christopher Columbus, or to investigate how many historians have debunked the popular urban myths about Columbus's so-called atrocities alleged in Howard Zinn's book 30 years ago. These are lies that have been perpetuated, unfortunately, for political reasons," end quote. And that was what gave me the idea to have you on the show. Why do we defend Christopher Columbus?
Well, you know better than anybody, Robert, that when you look at the history of what this man did and how he sailed 4 different voyages and did something basically nobody else ever had the guts to do back then in 1492. And the more you read the history, you understand the bravery of that whole thing. And it did open up and change the world. It really did. And I understood it that way. And sure, the city arguments, he never touched America, the contiguous part of the United States today, discredits him for discovering the New World. Well, he did discover a new world that nobody knew existed. So as far as I'm concerned, it still was a new world. In fact, anything that's new to me, if I didn't know before, it's new to me when I discover it for the first time. And and Columbus has always been a heroic figure in the world, in Italy, in Genoa, and we for 120 years, that's who he was, and we proudly attached ourselves to that man's historical achievement that he had at the time. And what's also happened is that what really hurts us is that for all the ethnic groups that are out there, that everybody is so concerned about social justice and trying to correct those who were oppressed in the past and those people that were hurt historically. Our Italian group in America was one of those people, and they give us no credence that we have an argument here that you are offending us every time you try to undermine our connection to Columbus and disregard who we are as an ethnic group, a very proud one that's assimilated better than probably any group in America. And it almost feels like an anti-Italian thing at the same time, Robert. Because
I say that I think that it's an anti-Western culture thing. That's my opinion.
Exactly. Then it goes back to Western culture because they got rid of Western Civ. It's not taught in school anymore. Now you have to teach all these other things. But this is our history. This is where we came from.
Yeah.
We came from England. If we came from another country, like maybe France or Italy, we wouldn't even be the United States today.
That's right. Yeah, we're running short on time, so I just want to say, in my opinion, I agree with everything you said. In my opinion, I think that the why that we defend Columbus is because Columbus detraction is based on lies, and we value as members of Western culture and the beneficiaries of the Enlightenment, we value truth, and so defending Columbus is defending truth and fighting these lies. Now, I know.
I agree 100%.
Yeah, I know that a collection of approximately a dozen Italian-American organizations have collectively sent a letter to Massachusetts Italian-American Legislative Caucus member, Senator Salvatore Di Domenico, demanding help from that caucus in combating the anti-Italian-American terrorism in Boston. And the letter, I thought, was poetically reminiscent of Thomas Jefferson's Declaration of Independence, where it calls for, quote, the rejection of bigotry in all its forms because it is inherently wrong and because it divides us as a people, an American people. And I think that this letter is a perfect template for similar grassroots letters to Italian-American legislative caucuses in any state. We only have a few minutes. Did you have a hand in that letter? And did Senator DiDonato ever respond?
That came from the Italian-American Alliance. We made that one of our purposes to reach out. I actually found out that we had an Italian-American caucus in Massachusetts. None of us even knew it. That's how invisible they are. And that's why we're kind of discouraged that they have not been more prominent as an advocate for their community, which they basically represent. So, yes, that letter brought the attention to them. And unfortunately, we haven't got you're right, we'll stand with you, but we're going to now make it more clearly that we hope that we can get them to be more aware of this, because we're going to continue to lobby them and ask for their support. In fact, we have plans to go to the State House. Guess what? After 700 days, they finally opened up the State House to the people of Massachusetts.
Oh, wow.
Because of the violence.
If that isn't reminiscent of the revolution, I don't know what.
So I wonder what they've been doing for 700 days anyways.
Yeah. Yeah, I remember when Bostonians weren't allowed in their own state houses. I mean, not personally, but I remember from the history books, and we fought a war over that. So, just to wrap up, I want the listeners to know Christopher Columbus University has been following events in Massachusetts since the beginning. Talking about the letter to Senator DiDomenico, I reported on that in episode 14, the primary historical sources. We talked about things that went on in Martha's Vineyard in episode 31, Columbus the Great Governor, in Worcester, Massachusetts in episode 27, Father Joseph Kelly's Christopher Columbus Day homily, the Medford, Massachusetts school board debacle in episode 11, Christopher Columbus Day and Atonement to Italian Americans. Westboro, as I said, the events of Westboro I mentioned in at least 4 episodes. The events in Billerica I mentioned in episode 28 with Mark Onewolf. And I also mentioned, just to wrap up, in episode 20, Dunt's Corner, featuring the caffeinated Marxista, I talked about how the Italian parliament had passed a motion pledging to support Italian-American activists in the United States seeking to preserve Christopher Columbus's holiday statues, monuments, and other namesakes. Particularly parliamentarians Fusianisoli and Federico Mollicone proposed the motion, which the Chamber of Deputies passed, though the United States mainstream media failed to report on the resolution at all. In Liguria, Italy, the city of Genoa, the largest city of the region and the birthplace of Christopher Columbus, unanimously passed a motion confirming its support, stating in part that the attacks on Genoa's favorite son are, quote, not only an attack on the figure of Christopher Columbus or the Italian community, but an attack on the whole of Western civilization, which developed on the American continent on October 12th, 1492, with the discovery of the New World, end quote. I love that language. And also Liguria's second largest city, La Spezia, joined in with its own vehement support of the fight for civil rights of Americans of Italian descent in honoring Christopher Columbus. Then other Italian cities, Diano Marina, Ceriano Leghetto, also showed their solidarity and support. So I wonder, has the IAA received any support, moral or otherwise, from our fratelli across the Atlantic?
The quick answer is yes, we have. It's been through the Conference of Presidents. We actually met with the ambassador of Italy down in Washington, D.C., and we also have our consulate here in Boston, and we've very much used that proclamation to bring us closer to our Italian cousins in Italy. And we're doing a lot more things educationally and cultural, and we have a wonderful relationship. And the Italian-American Alliance has been prominent in trying to promote that and create that relationship to make it stronger so we have another voice in this whole issue.
Great. And if any listeners would like to join or support the Italian American Alliance, they can find you online, right?
Yes, it's the THEIAA.net is our website. And like I said, the Facebook is the Italian American Alliance at gmail.com is our email. And anyways, you can find us online, and I really appreciate everybody's support, and yours particularly, Robert. And Robert, you're the master at this. You are such an expert at this. And if people paid attention to your broadcast, they'll learn a lot more about it.
Thank you, sir. And that's today's class. For more news, articles, and resources about Christopher Columbus as the first civil rights activist of the Americas, icon of Western culture, paragon of Catholic virtue, and greatest hero of the 15th and 16th centuries, visit preservecolumbus.us. That's Preserve Columbus, rendered as one word, .us, and post a little note of appreciation for our webmaster, Tom LaCosta. I'm il professore Robert Petrone. A presto!
The Jersey Shore has fun and sun, sand and sea, and Radio Voice Italian.